Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads so raw, so unexpected, that everything you believed about your future unraveled in a single night? She was 9 months pregnant, alone, in a snowstorm, when her body gave in and the world gave her no choice but to knock on the window of a stranger's car. But what if that stranger wasn't just anyone? What if he was a millionaire, grieving a marriage that had already crumbled in silence? What if, in that chaotic moment, two broken lives collided not in disaster, but in something that felt dangerously close to destiny? Would you have trusted him? Would you have let him drive? Would you have dared to believe he could be more than your rescue? This is not a fairy tale. It's not about perfect people or perfect timing. It's about a woman who had every reason to run and chose to stay. About a man who had everything, but nothing that mattered until that night. Their story begins not with a kiss, but with a cry. Not with romance, but with revelation. If you've ever loved, lost, or longed for a place to call home, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to follow the story that began in the snow and led to something greater than love. The rain had a way of rewriting everything that night. It wasn't just the downpour that soaked the streets of Maineville, Massachusetts. It was the kind that came with wind, with thunder that rolled like grief, and with a strange sense that something was about to change. Victor Grant sat motionless behind the wheel of his parked Cadillac Escalade, the wipers beating rhythmically, but doing little to clear the fog on the glass. He stared ahead at nothing in particular, his knuckles bone white against the steering wheel. He hadn't moved for nearly 20 minutes. The paper envelope from the fertility clinic sat on the passenger seat, opened but unread beyond the first few words. He didn't need to see the rest. Severely impaired, low motility. Natural conception unlikely. Words that struck deeper than any loss he had endured before, and Victor had endured his fair share. At 37, Victor was the kind of man people described with impressive-sounding phrases. A tech investor, a real estate magnate, a philanthropist. His face had once been on the cover of Forbes under the title, "The Quiet Power Behind Boston's Billionaires." But titles didn't mean much when you were sitting in a dark car with no one to call. His wife, Isabella, was likely already at the Harrington fundraiser, her champagne-colored gown perfectly pressed, her smile practiced and poised. She'd expect him there soon, and she'd expect him to play the part. But tonight, Victor felt hollow, useless, like a well-dressed vessel carrying only silence. The dashboard clock blinked 7:46 p.m. Victor turned the key but didn't shift into drive. Instead, he pulled out of the parking lot slowly, almost absent-mindedly, and began cruising down narrow side streets away from Beacon Hill, away from the penthouse, away from Isabella's cold presence. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to keep moving. That's when he saw her. It happened quickly, in the kind of way that sticks with a man for the rest of his life. A woman staggered out of the glow of a small community clinic, holding one hand to her belly, the other against the wall. Her body moved like it was fighting itself, one step forward, half a step back. Victor pulled over without thinking. The woman collapsed to her knees on the rain-soaked sidewalk just as he threw open his door and ran to her. The cold bit through his Italian wool suit, but he barely noticed. Up close, He saw that she was young, maybe late 20s, her curly chestnut hair plastered to her forehead, her hospital scrubs clinging to her like a second skin, and she was pregnant. Very pregnant. "Hey, hey, it's okay," he said, kneeling beside her. She gasped through clenched teeth, her fingers tightening on her abdomen. "Just give me a second." She managed. "You're in labor," he said, voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "No hospital here," she replied between breaths. "Tried. Mass General, but contractions came too fast." Victor hesitated only a second. "My car's right there. I'm taking you." She shook her head. "I can't pay." He was already lifting her, ignoring the water soaking through his clothes. "I didn't ask for payment," he said, carefully placing her in the passenger seat. "We'll figure the rest out later." He pulled into traffic, tires slicing through puddles, heart pounding louder than the engine. "Name's June," she said, through another sharp breath. "Victor," he replied. "Just hang in there. June. You're not alone." The next few minutes were a blur. Her contractions came quicker now, her breathing short and shallow, between waves of pain. She spoke in fragments how she'd worked at the clinic until her body couldn't take it anymore, how her boyfriend left the moment she told him she was pregnant, how she had nowhere to go but a shelter that didn't allow newborns. Victor glanced at her between red lights. Rain streaked the windshield, catching the city lights and scattering them like broken glass. In the glow of the dashboard, she looked exhausted but fierce. Her eyes hazel, ringed with gold, were full of fear, but not of him. "You're going to be okay," he said, quieter now. A small sound escaped her lips, half laugh, half cry. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," he answered. "Sometimes you just help." They were 5 blocks from Mass General when June cried out again, this time louder, her hand grasping the door handle like an anchor. "It's coming!" She gasped. I don't think we're going to make it." Victor's stomach turned. "You will, I promise." He turned down a quiet side street and stopped the car under a street lamp, engine still running. He took a breath, and then, with the calm of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers but never delivered a baby, he said, "Tell me what to do." Under the dim streetlight, in the front seat of a luxury SUV, a man who believed he had nothing to offer became the only thing that mattered. And June, a woman abandoned by the man who was supposed to love her, found herself clinging to the voice of a stranger. The child was born at 8:09 p.m., just as thunder rolled over the city like applause. A baby girl. Her first cry was sharp and defiant. Victor blinked hard, unable to stop the tears that came with it. He wrapped the baby in his coat, handed her carefully to June, and stared at both of them as if he'd seen a miracle. June was crying too, but she was smiling now, cheeks flushed and eyes wet with wonder. "She's beautiful," Victor whispered. "She's Stella," June replied, looking up at him. "My star." He nodded slowly, overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't name. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling, "why are you doing this?" He looked out at the rain, then back at her. "Because I think maybe this is where I was supposed to be tonight." And in that quiet, between one breath and the next, something shifted, not just in the car, but in him. The streets were quiet now, hushed beneath the weight of rain and the residue of something sacred. Victor kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently resting on the edge of the baby carrier, fashioned hastily from his wool overcoat. Stella slept, chest rising and falling in a rhythm so delicate it felt borrowed from another world. June leaned against the passenger seat, her eyelids heavy but refusing to close completely. Her body trembled, not from pain, but from the aftermath of it all. Neither spoke for a long time. The SUV glided through Boston's midnight streets, the world outside softened by fog and glass. They passed shuttered storefronts, glowing lamplight reflected in puddles like echoes of the past. Every so often, June would glance over at the sleeping baby, her hand moving instinctively to touch her daughter's cheek. Victor stole glances too, not at the baby, but at June. Her face, even in exhaustion, held a kind of quiet strength. There were tear tracks on her cheeks, dried now, and a look in her eyes that reminded him of the ocean before a storm, vast, unreadable, and deeper than it seemed. "You should rest," he said quietly, as they passed the public garden. "I can't," June replied, voice raspier than before. "Not yet. Not until I know what comes next." Victor hesitated. "You're going to the hospital. You both need to be checked, monitored, safe." She nodded, but it was slow, uncertain. I don't have insurance anymore. And even if they keep me overnight, I don't have a place to go after. I was staying at a shelter, but with Stella, that's not an option anymore." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned down a residential side street, lined with sleeping brownstones and trees dripping with rain. The Escalade rolled to a stop outside Massachusetts General Hospital, its emergency entrance lit in muted blues and whites. June looked up at the building, her shoulders sagging. Victor turned to her. "Let me take care of it." "No," she said immediately. "You've done enough. More than enough. I don't even know you. I can't accept you're not accepting charity." He interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "You're accepting help from someone who was exactly where he needed to be tonight. That's all." June's eyes welled again, but this time she didn't fight it. "I don't even know your last name," she said, with a soft, broken laugh. "Grant." He replied, "Victor Grant." She blinked. "As in Grant Tech," Grant Victor gave a quiet smile. "That one." "Oh," June whispered, 1,000 realizations crashing at once. She looked at the leather seats, the quiet power of the SUV, the understated confidence in the man beside her. "So, you're a man who happened to be driving by," he said, finishing her thought, "and who would like to make sure you and your daughter are okay." June hesitated again, her pride wrestling with exhaustion and instinct. "Okay," she whispered at last, "but just the hospital. Nothing else." Victor nodded, one step at a time. Inside the ER, the staff acted quickly. Nurses cooed over the baby, doctors checked June's vitals, and paperwork was filed, while Victor stood nearby, feeling strangely untethered. He wasn't family, he wasn't anyone, but somehow he felt more connected to this moment than to anything else in his life. When a nurse finally emerged from the exam room an hour later, she smiled at him. "Both mother and baby are stable," she said. "Tired, but healthy. That baby has a strong set of lungs." Victor chuckled quietly, his first real smile in days. June asked if you could come in. The nurse added. The room was quiet when he stepped inside. June lay propped against a hospital pillow, her face pale but calm. Stella slept in a bassinet beside her, swaddled and impossibly small. "You're still here," June said softly. Victor sat in the chair next to her bed. Where else would I be? A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "She wasn't supposed to be born like this," June said after a moment. "I had this plan. A hospital birth, music playing. I even made a list of affirmations to read out loud when things got hard." "Plans change," Victor replied. "But she came into the world surrounded by strength. That's not nothing." June looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Why did you stop?" she asked quietly. He frowned. "Stop what?" "To help me. You could have kept driving." "Most people would have." Victor looked down at his hands, then at Stella, sleeping so peacefully beside her mother. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I've been feeling lost lately. Tonight felt like the first time I did something that mattered in a long time." June didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached out, carefully, and rested her hand over his. Neither of them said anything else, not until the nurse came back in to check vitals and the moment dissolved, like steam on a cold window. The next morning, the city woke up under a soft gray sky, its usual hustle dulled by the steady patter of leftover rain. In the maternity wing of Massachusetts General, room 412 glowed with quiet light, filtered through a thin white curtain. Victor sat by the window, coffee in hand, though he hadn't taken a sip. His eyes were fixed on the two figures resting just a few feet away. June, asleep at last, and her daughter curled against her chest. Both breathed in unison, like they belonged to a rhythm older than anything Victor had ever known. It felt wrong to watch, and yet impossible not to. The nurse who brought in fresh linens paused when she saw him, still there. "You don't have to stay, she said kindly, keeping her voice low. "I know," Victor replied. He didn't offer more. The nurse gave a gentle nod, then stepped out as quietly as she'd entered. A moment later, June stirred. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and, for a second, she looked at the room like she didn't recognize it. Then her gaze landed on Stella, and her whole body softened. Victor rose to his feet. "Hey," he said, voice calm. "How are you feeling?" June blinked up at him, disoriented, like I got hit by a very polite bus. He chuckled. "Polite. Well, the nurses here keep saying please." Victor smiled, walking closer. "Stella's been quiet, slept through the night." "She likes you," June murmured, adjusting the baby's position. "You have a steady voice. I don't think she knows me well enough to have an opinion yet." June looked at him for a long moment. "You stayed." Victor shrugged, "but it wasn't casual. I didn't want to leave." There was a pause, just long enough for both of them to feel the weight of those words. "I owe you so much," she said softly. "No," he replied quickly. "You don't owe me anything. You did the hard part." June's eyes dropped to Stella's face. "Still, last night could have gone so differently." Victor sat back down beside her. "It didn't. That's what matters now." She looked up again. "So, Victor Grant, what's your story?" The question was simple, but the answer felt tangled. "I grew up not far from here, south of Brookline," he said. "My dad was a corporate lawyer. My mom was a watercolor painter. She passed when I was 12. Cancer. I'm sorry," June said immediately. He nodded, swallowing. "Thanks. After that, well, Let's just say my dad didn't know how to raise a kid. Sent me to boarding school. I buried myself in work early. Built a company, sold it, made money, built another. June studied him, and, somewhere along the line, forgot why you started. Victor's lips curved upward, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Something like that. And your wife? She asked quietly, not unkindly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Isabella. We've been distant for a long time. Separate lives, separate calendars. Last night, I was coming from a fertility clinic. Found out it's unlikely I'll ever have kids. June's breath caught. Victor looked down at his hands. It hit harder than I thought it would. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft sounds of the hospital, the beep of machines, footsteps in the hall. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know what it's like to get news you didn't ask for. He nodded, glancing at Stella. Funny thing is, in the middle of all that, I found myself helping bring a life into the world. June looked down, her voice low. She didn't have anyone else. She had you, Victor said. That's more than enough. Silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. What about you? He asked. June inhaled slowly. Grew up in Portland. My mom worked 3 jobs. My dad left when I was 7. I always wanted to be a nurse, so I saved, went to school, made it happen. Then Tristan happened. Victor leaned forward slightly. He was charming, smart, said all the right things. She continued, her voice steady. But the minute I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. Left a note and some bills paid. That was it. Victor felt something sharp twist inside him. I tried to hold everything together, June said, her eyes still on Stella. But you can only work so many hours on your feet before your body gives up. I had to stop working at 7 months. That's when I ended up at the shelter. You shouldn't have had to do that alone, Victor said, his voice low. June met his gaze. I didn't expect a stranger in a car to change everything. Victor looked at her for a long time. Maybe we're not strangers anymore. There was something in her eyes, uncertainty, but not fear. More like someone who had been alone so long that kindness felt foreign. June reached out, brushing a finger across Stella's tiny hand. Her full name is Stella June Holloway. I gave her my middle name, something strong to carry with her. Victor's smile was soft. It suits her. What's yours? She asked. Mine, your full name. He hesitated. Victor Nathaniel Grant. She tilted her head. Sounds presidential. I've been accused of worse. She laughed, a real one this time. Well, Mr. Grant, looks like we both had very different nights planned. Victor nodded. And yet, here we are. June looked out the window, where the rain had begun again, gentler now, more like a whisper than a storm. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. I don't even know where I'll go once they discharge me. Victor didn't speak right away. He looked at the baby, then at June. What if you didn't have to figure it out alone? June turned toward him, eyes wide. I have a place. It's quiet, safe. There's a cottage behind my estate. No one's lived there in years. It has heat, a full kitchen, privacy. You could stay there for a while. Get your footing. She stared at him. You're serious? I am, he said simply. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. And I know that no mother should have to rebuild her life in a shelter while caring for a newborn. June looked down at Stella, then back at him. "I'll think about it." Victor nodded. "That's all I ask." And with that, they returned to silence. But something had shifted, not just in the conversation, but in the space between them. 3 days passed before June was discharged from the hospital. During those days, Victor visited daily. He brought flowers, once not roses, but a small bouquet of wild daisies and lavender. June hadn't said much about them, but she placed them beside Stella's bassinet, and each morning she made sure they had fresh water. They talked a little, mostly about Stella's feeding schedule or hospital forms. But between the lines, something else had begun to settle between them. Not quite comfort, not yet trust, but something warm, something promising. When the day came for June and Stella to leave, the nurse handed June a baby carrier that had magically appeared beside her bed overnight, top of the line, brand new, courtesy of Mr. Grant, the nurse said with a wink. June flushed. Of course it is. Victor was waiting in the hallway, hands in his pockets, his usual calm expression hiding whatever storm was inside him. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," June replied, adjusting the strap across her shoulder. They walked side by side down the corridor, the baby nestled between them. June held Stella with practiced care, though her arms were still weak from labor. Victor kept a respectful distance, but his presence filled the space like something solid, like oak furniture or warm wool. Outside, the late morning sun broke through gray clouds, streaking the hospital steps in gold. Victor opened the passenger door for her. "Still not too late to change your mind," he said gently. June looked at the car, then at him. "I haven't said yes yet." "No," Victor agreed, "but you haven't said no either." She bit her bottom lip. "I told you I needed time to think." "You've had time." June turned to face him fully. "I've been independent my whole life, Victor. I don't take handouts, and I don't live in a rich man's cottage just because it's convenient." His eyes met hers, steady and soft. "I'm not offering convenience. I'm offering safety. Peace. A place where no one will ask questions or judge you for being a mother without a home." She hesitated. "And what do you get out of it?" she asked, quieter now. "I get to help someone who deserves it," he replied. "That's all?" June studied him for a long moment. Her instincts had rarely failed her. She'd learned early on how to read faces nurses had to, and Victor's wasn't just composed. It was honest, maybe too honest for someone who had the power to be anything else. She exhaled. "All right, but just until I get things in order." Victor didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply opened the door wider. "Welcome aboard," he said. The drive out of the city was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Stella slept most of the way, and June found herself watching the trees blur past the window, each one a little taller, a little older than the last. Eventually, the streets gave way to winding lanes, and the houses grew farther apart, grander, older. They passed through an iron gate without stopping. It opened automatically, like something out of a storybook. Victor glanced at her. "You all right?" June was silent for a beat. "Are you sure this isn't too much? I'm sure," he said. "And you haven't even seen it yet." The road curved, and the estate came into view. The main house loomed ahead, a red brick Georgian structure with white columns and ivy crawling up its sides. It looked like it belonged in a movie about old money and whispered secrets. But Victor didn't stop there. Instead, he followed a gravel path off to the left, past rows of trimmed hedges and a small orchard, until they reached a smaller house tucked behind a thicket of birch trees. The cottage. It was made of weathered stone, with a gray slate roof and wooden shutters painted the color of sage. Flower boxes hung beneath each window, filled with herbs and late-blooming pansies. The front door was deep green, with a brass knocker shaped like a fox. June stared. This isn't a cottage. It's a dream. It's yours, for as long as you need it. Before she could speak, a woman stepped out from the side garden. She was in her 60s, with silver hair twisted into a bun and warm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her presence was brisk but kind, like a seasoned nurse or lifelong teacher. "June, this is Mrs. Langford," Victor said. "She's the estate manager and the heart of this place." Mrs. Langford stepped forward with a smile. "We've been expecting you." June blinked. Victor told me a guest might be arriving. I took the liberty of preparing the cottage. Pantry's stocked. Linens are fresh. There's a crib upstairs and a bassinet beside the master bed. If it's not to your taste, we'll change it. June opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. "Would you like to come in?" Victor asked. She nodded slowly. The inside of the cottage smelled faintly of cedar and fresh bread. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, catching on the white cabinets and wooden countertops. The living room was cozy, with a stone fireplace, deep couches, and a rocking chair positioned beside a stack of classic novels. Upstairs, the nursery was painted a pale yellow. 2 cribs waited, though June only needed 1. A soft mobile of stars and clouds turned slowly above them. June turned to Victor, eyes damp. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," he said. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Victor replied. "It's a clean slate, for both of us." That caught her off guard. He stepped back toward the stairs. "I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, Mrs. Langford's just next door." June watched him descend, the soft creak of the stairs the only sound between them. And then, alone, in a room built for beginnings, she held her daughter close and whispered, "Maybe we'll be okay after all." The cottage was quiet at night. Outside, wind whispered through the birch trees, rustling leaves that had begun their slow descent into fall. Inside, the baby monitor glowed softly on the nightstand beside June's bed, pulsing with each small breath from Stella's crib. It had been 2 weeks since she'd moved in. 2 weeks of healing, of adjusting, of figuring out the rhythm of newborn life outside the walls of a hospital. June had expected the days to feel heavy with uncertainty, but somehow they didn't. The quiet helped, so did the safety, but mostly it was the feeling that she wasn't doing this alone anymore. Victor had kept his promise. He hadn't hovered. He hadn't pushed. Instead, he stopped by once a day with things she hadn't asked for, but needed anyway. A soft carrier for Stella's fussy days. A batch of homemade soup I used to cook. Believe it or not, he'd said, a book of bedtime stories, its pages worn from use. They never stayed long in conversation, but when they did talk, something deep always crept in between the silences. Tonight, June couldn't sleep. She wrapped herself in a cardigan and padded barefoot to the kitchen. She was pouring warm milk into a mug when she heard footsteps on the stone path outside. Not heavy, familiar. She peeked through the curtain. "Victor?" She opened the door before he could knock. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He offered a tired smile. "Not for days." June stepped aside. "You want tea?" "Sure," he said, brushing rain from his jacket as he entered. "If you've got the good kind. Always." They sat at the small kitchen table. The clock ticked in the background. Stella's quiet coo drifted from the monitor every so often, like a heartbeat. Victor held the warm mug, but didn't drink. His eyes lingered on the candle June had lit, a simple thing, but it threw soft light across the wooden table, catching the gold strands in her hair. "I used to think silence was my favorite sound," he said, almost to himself, "until I realized I only liked it because it meant no one expected anything from me." June looked up. "That sounds lonely." He shrugged. It was. She waited, sensing something more behind the words. Victor leaned back, exhaling. "My mother died when I was 12. She was the only person who ever really saw me. My dad. He did what men like him do, threw himself into work. We barely spoke until I was in college." "I'm sorry," June said, quietly. Victor gave a small nod. "I started building companies because it gave me something to control. People listened. Numbers made sense. Relationships, not so much." June wrapped both hands around her tea. "Is that why you married Isabella?" A pause. "She was beautiful," he said. "Smart. Social. Our families thought we'd make the perfect match. And for a while, I believed them." What changed Victor's eyes darkened slightly. "I realized I was a tool in her portfolio, an asset, not a partner." June said nothing, letting the quiet settle. She wanted children eventually. Victor added, "But more for the optics, the air." "The holiday cards." June raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "I wanted them for the noise, for the chaos, for the warmth." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "That's why the news hit so hard. The fertility results. I'd built everything, but forgot to leave room for the life I wanted most." The honesty in his voice made June's throat tighten. She set her mug down. "You're not alone in that." Victor tilted his head. "No." June exhaled slowly. "I thought I had it figured out, too. School, career. I was saving for a house. Then came Tristan." Victor's gaze sharpened. "The father." June nodded. "We met through a friend. He was charming in that too-good-to-be-true kind of way. And he was. When I told him I was pregnant, he froze, then disappeared. Said he wasn't ready for all that. Took his stuff, cleared the bank account, and vanished." Victor's jaw clenched. Coward. June gave a humorless smile. "At first I was angry. Then I was ashamed. But mostly I was afraid. That I wouldn't be enough." "You are," Victor said immediately. She looked at him. "You're more than enough." "June." Silence stretched between them again. But this time it hummed with something new recognition. Two people who had once built walls, learning they could lower them without crumbling. "I think," June said softly, "that maybe we're both trying to unlearn the same thing." "What's that? That being strong means being alone?" Victor looked down, then back at her. "Maybe that's why I came by tonight. Not for tea." "No," she asked, voice gentle. "I just didn't want to be alone." June reached out without thinking, placing her hand over his. It was warm, solid. "You're not," she said. "Not tonight." Autumn came slowly to the Grant estate. The leaves turned in shades of rust and gold, painting the gravel paths and tree-lined edges like a watercolor left in the rain. A breeze carried the scent of pine and chimney smoke, and each morning the world outside the cottage grew quieter, as if preparing for something. Inside, life was anything but still. Stella had found her voice, and with it came the unpredictable rhythm of newborn days. June moved through the cottage with practiced grace, half nurse, half mother, all heart. The kitchen was often filled with soft lullabies from the old radio, the smell of cinnamon tea, and the occasional gentle coo of a baby learning the shape of her world. Victor visited often, though never too long. He'd knock gently around mid-morning, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but time. He always asked first, "Is this a good moment?" and never assumed the answer would be yes, but it usually was. One Tuesday, he arrived with a small wooden box in his hands. June was on the porch, rocking Stella slowly as the wind teased at the baby's knitted cap. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the box. Victor sat beside her, placing it on the small table between them. "Something I made." June raised an eyebrow. "You build things now." He gave a small shrug. "Used to, before boardrooms and balance sheets." She opened the box carefully. Inside was a mobile made of smooth, hand-carved wood, a moon, a cluster of stars, and a bird mid-flight. Each piece hung from soft string, perfectly balanced. June blinked. "Victor, it's beautiful." He looked at Stella, who waved a tiny hand toward the sky. "I figured she could use something above her crib, something that moves when the world feels still." June smiled, softer than before. "You're full of surprises." They sat in silence for a while, watching the leaves drift down. Stella dozed off again, and June lifted her carefully, bringing her inside for a nap. When she returned, Victor was still there, now standing near the garden bed where Mrs. Langford had planted late autumn herbs. "She says I should try gardening," he said when June joined him. "She's right. It's good for your soul." He looked at her, thoughtful. "I think mine's been starved for a while." They walked slowly through the garden path. June's arms crossed against the chill. "You seem lighter," he observed. She nodded. "I feel like I'm learning how to breathe again. For the first time in a long while, I'm not constantly bracing for the next thing to go wrong." Victor glanced sideways. "That's a good feeling." "It is," she said, then added, almost reluctantly, and also terrifying, "Why? Because I don't know how long it'll last, and I don't know what happens when this chapter ends. If I let myself rely on peace, what happens when it's gone?" Victor stopped walking. "Maybe it doesn't have to be a chapter." June turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if peace isn't something temporary? What if you deserve it for good?" The words hung between them like breath in cold air. June looked down. "I'm not used to people offering me that." "I'm not used to offering it," he admitted. A few days later, it rained again, this time steady, cleansing, the kind of rain that makes you pause mid-thought and listen. June stayed inside, folded laundry while Stella napped, and glanced now and then at the empty doorway, half expecting a knock, but none came. By late afternoon, she found herself walking across the path to the main house, heart slightly faster than necessary. "Mrs." Langford answered with her usual grace. "He's in the library." June stepped into the room slowly. Victor stood by the fireplace, sleeves rolled up, a leather-bound book in one hand. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, you didn't come by," she said simply. "I didn't want to intrude." She took a few steps closer. "I think we're past that." A quiet pause. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain whispered against the windows. Victor set the book down. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Do you ever wonder what life might have looked like if just one moment had been different? June thought for a long moment. "I used to. Every day, I'd replay conversations, decisions. What if I hadn't met Tristan? What if I'd taken another job? What if everything, and now," she said, "I just try to be grateful for where I landed, even if I wouldn't have chosen the path that got me here." Victor nodded slowly. "I think about it, too." He said, "What I built, what I lost, the things I thought I wanted, and the things I never let myself admit I needed." June stepped beside him, close, but not too close, like what he looked at her. A real connection, something quiet and true. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe it's not too late." The air between them tightened, but not with pressure, with possibility. Victor reached for her hand, but didn't take it. He let it rest beside hers, close enough to feel the warmth. Neither moved. Neither needed to. In the quiet days, their hearts had begun to speak louder than words. It was early November when the invitation arrived. The envelope was cream-colored, thick and expensive, sealed with a golden insignia that shimmered in the afternoon light. Mrs. Langford brought it in with the mail, placing it carefully on the kitchen counter of the cottage like it might bite. June picked it up and turned it over. The name on the front, Victor Nathaniel Grant, was written in looping, elegant script. She felt a strange twist in her stomach. Later that evening, after Stella had been put to bed and the cottage filled with the soft hum of quiet. Victor arrived for tea. He always came around this time just long enough to check in, sometimes long enough to stay for a slow conversation, sometimes too long for June's guarded heart. She handed him the envelope before he could speak. "This came for you." Victor took it, eyes scanning the seal. "Harrington Foundation Gala." He muttered, "Of course." He opened it with the practiced detachment of a man who'd attended too many events, like this black-tie charity affairs, filled with over-polished speeches and champagne flutes no one truly enjoyed. "Big event?" June asked, her tone casual. He nodded. "Annual fundraiser, the kind of place where people donate just enough to get their name on a plaque." She smiled faintly. "Sounds thrilling." He chuckled. "It isn't, but they raised money for pediatric heart surgeries last year. That's something." She watched his face. There was something underneath the surface, an unease he hadn't voiced. "Are you going?" she asked. "I wasn't sure," he said, "but I might now." June tilted her head. "Why now?" Victor hesitated. "Because I'd like you to come with me." The words landed between them like a pebble in still water, gentle but full of ripples. June blinked. "Me?" Victor offered a small smile. "Yes, you." She looked away for a moment, heart thudding faster than it should. "I don't have anything to wear to a gala. I barely have a dress that isn't made of cotton." "I'll take care of that," he said. "If you'll let me." She laughed quietly, unsure if it was from nerves or disbelief. You want to take a woman you barely know, who just gave birth in your SUV, to a black tie event filled with socialites. Victor's gaze softened. I want to take the woman who brought a little girl into the world with more grace and courage than anyone I've ever met. That's who I want standing beside me. June looked down at her hands, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I ask. The next few days passed with a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. June caught herself staring at the invitation more than once. She knew what it meant to be seen in public with a man like Victor, what assumptions would follow. But some part of her, the part that had started to believe in second chances, wanted to see what it felt like to be something more than someone surviving. When a package arrived from a boutique in Boston inside, a navy evening gown with a neckline that whispered elegance rather than shouted June didn't send it back. Instead, she tried it on. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself, not because of the dress or the way it hugged her gently, but because she looked at peace, maybe even beautiful. The woman staring back wasn't just a single mother trying to hold it all together. She was someone with a future. The night of the gala, Mrs. Langford offered to stay with Stella. I haven't rocked a baby in years, she said with a smile. Tonight, I'll pretend she's mine. Victor arrived promptly at 7. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp and perfectly tailored, but it wasn't the clothes that made June pause when she opened the door. It was his expression, gentle, unwavering, like seeing her in that dress answered a question he hadn't dared to ask. You look, he began, then paused. Like every room you enter is lucky. June flushed. That's a new one. He offered his arm. Shall we? They drove to the city in comfortable quiet, interrupted only by the occasional joke or story. Victor's hand brushed hers once on the gearshift. Neither moved away. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Exeter Hotel, all chandeliers and crystal glasses and the hum of wealth. June moved beside Victor like a shadow, at first unsure, hesitant, but he never let go of her hand. He introduced her only as June. No explanation, no qualifiers, and no one dared question him. They danced once, a slow waltz beneath a ceiling of stars and strings. For that moment, June let herself forget everything outside that room, every hardship, every wound. She was just a woman, and he was just a man. When the music ended, she didn't let go immediately. Neither did he. And then the moment shifted. Across the room, a voice called Victor's name. He turned slightly, and June followed his gaze straight into the face of a tall man in a sharp tuxedo, his smile charming, his eyes too sharp. Victor Grant, the man said, stepping forward with a glass of champagne. I'll be damned. Victor's expression changed instantly, controlled, guarded. Tristan, he said, flat, no warmth. June froze. The name rang through her like an echo from a life she'd buried. And then Tristan turned to her. Well, he said, grinning wider, if it isn't June Holloway. For a few long seconds, the ballroom seemed to fall silent, even though the music played on and laughter bubbled across the floor like champagne. June felt the ground shift beneath her heels. Tristan Reed, the man who had vanished from her life in a single afternoon, the man who left without a note, without a phone call, without the decency of closure, stood now beneath a chandelier, smiling like nothing had happened. He looked exactly the same. That same sculpted jawline, the hair a little longer, maybe. The tailored tuxedo hung on him like he belonged in this world of glinting glass and polite applause, but his eyes, they hadn't changed, still too sharp, still watching her like she was a story he'd already read and thrown away. "June," he said again, stepping forward. "I didn't think I'd see you here." Victor's arm stiffened beside her. He hadn't moved. June swallowed, but her throat was dry. "Didn't expect to see you either." Tristan looked at Victor, his smile widening. "And you too? Are you a thing now, wow? You move fast." Victor's voice was calm, cold. "Back off. Tristan!" But June stepped forward, something simmering under her skin. "What are you doing here?" Tristan raised an eyebrow. "I'm a donor now. My startup got acquired last quarter. Thought I'd use some of the profit to feel good about myself." She narrowed her eyes. "That tracks." He let out a soft chuckle. "Come on, June, don't be like that. We had something real once." "No," she replied, her voice steady. "You ran when it got real." That made Tristan pause. Victor gently touched June's arm. "You don't have to do this," but she shook her head. "I do." She turned back to Tristan. "You left me when I was scared and alone. You disappeared. Now you show up, sipping champagne like you didn't break something." Tristan's expression darkened. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. Just surprised to see you playing Cinderella." Victor stepped between them now. "Walk away." Tristan met his eyes. "Or what you'll buy me out of the room." Victor didn't flinch. "If I have to." June pulled gently on Victor's sleeve. "Let's go." But just before they turned, Tristan said one last thing, his voice low and venom-laced. "Just be careful. Victor, girls like her have a way of turning sob stories into full-time jobs." June froze. Her chest tightened, and for a moment her breath caught in her throat. Victor's jaw clenched. "You just made a mistake." Tristan smiled thinly. "I usually do, but they pay off." Victor took June's hand without another word and led her out of the ballroom, past curious eyes and whispering mouths, through velvet-curtained hallways until they reached the back terrace. The night air was crisp, quiet. Only the city lights shimmered in the dark like scattered thoughts. June pulled her hand back, slowly. Victor turned to her. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. That's not your fault. I should have known. I didn't know he'd—" "How could you?" she said softly. "Neither of us saw this coming." He watched her closely. "Are you okay?" June nodded once, but her voice shook. "He made me feel small. Again. You're not." "I know," she whispered, "but it still hurts." There was a long silence. Victor leaned against the railing, fingers tight on the edge. "He's wrong about you." She looked at him. "He thinks this is a game, a performance. But he doesn't know what it took for you to stand here tonight, what it took to keep going." June's eyes welled up. "Thank you." Victor didn't touch her, didn't rush her. He just stood close enough to catch her if she broke. "I don't care what anyone thinks." He said, "About you, about us." This night wasn't about them. She gave a soft, tired laugh. "It kind of was." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it also reminded me what matters." "What's that?" He turned to face her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "The people who show up, when it's not convenient, when it's hard." She looked down. the words striking a place inside her that still felt bruised. "I need to go home," she said after a moment. "Of course. I just need to hold my daughter." Victor nodded. "I'll take you." The drive back was silent. When they arrived, Mrs. Langford greeted them with a knowing look, but said nothing. She passed Stella to June gently, then disappeared into the night like a quiet guardian. June held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of milk and innocence. Victor stood at the doorway. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. He hesitated. "Only if you want me to." She nodded slowly. He stepped inside, and for the first time that night, something in both of them settled, not because the night had gone well, but because they had survived it together. The next morning, the world felt like it hadn't quite recovered from the night before. A low fog clung to the fields behind the cottage, and the birch trees that had once whispered in the wind now stood eerily still. Even Stella seemed quieter than usual, her tiny face furrowed in a sleep deeper than normal, as if she too had absorbed the weight of her mother's emotions. June sat at the kitchen table, untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. She kept replaying Tristan's voice in her head, the venom behind his charm, the way he'd reduced her to a cautionary tale, and, worst of all, how a part of her, some bruised corner of her heart, still believed him. The cottage door creaked open. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. Victor stepped inside, holding a paper bag and 2 cups from her favorite cafe. He set them down wordlessly, his movements slow, careful. "Morning," he said gently. June gave him a tired glance. "You didn't have to bring coffee. I didn't want you to feel alone." She looked down, voice barely above a whisper. "I do. Sometimes." Victor sat across from her. "You don't have to pretend around me." Silence. Then, softly, "Do you believe him?" Victor frowned. "Tristan." She nodded. "That I'm using this, playing the victim." His voice was firm. "Absolutely not. But people like him always find a way to sound right." She said, "He knows exactly how to get under my skin." And now I can't stop hearing him. Victor reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "What you've been through, what you've overcome, it doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest." She looked at him. "You think people can start over?" "Really start over I do," he said, "because I think I'm trying to." That made her pause. He leaned back. "Last night reminded me why I left that world behind. The parties, the politics, the faces that only smile when the camera's on." June watched him closely. "Then why do you still go?" "Because sometimes standing in that room reminds me who I don't want to be." Her voice softened. "You didn't belong there, either." "No," he agreed. "But standing next to you, that felt different." She gave a small, grateful smile. Even with the drama, especially with the drama, they both laughed, then quiet, real, and for a moment. The fog outside seemed to lift. But peace, like weather, never stays for long. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Langford knocked on the cottage door with a letter in her hand and concern in her eyes. "This was left at the gate," she said. June took it, her chest tightening. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Victor watched her open it. Inside was a single piece of paper. No signature, just typed words. "A man like that doesn't save girls like you. He keeps them until they're not interesting anymore." June stared at it, breath caught in her throat. Victor stood immediately, reading over her shoulder. His face darkened. "It's him." She nodded slowly. "I know." He reached for the letter. "I'm calling security. I'll add a surveillance system. This won't happen again." But June shook her head. "It's not about the letter." Victor paused. "Then what is it?" "It's that I'm scared he's right." Victor's voice dropped. "He's not. He knows how to make people doubt themselves," she said. "And right now, I feel like I'm breaking in two. One part of me wants to believe in this, in you, and the other part is terrified that none of this is real." Victor stepped closer. "It is." She met his eyes, tears brimming. "I want to believe that so badly." He reached out slowly, cupping her face with both hands. "Then let me prove it to you, day by day, however long it takes." She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of him. "I don't want to run any more," she whispered. "Then stay," he said. The wind picked up outside, the storm beginning to return, but in that cottage, with her forehead resting against his chest and his arms around her shoulders, June found something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Safe. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. After the letter, Victor doubled security on the estate. Cameras were installed, gates reinforced, and Mrs. Langford added an extra check-in each evening just to be sure. Yet even with these safeguards, June felt the tension linger just beneath her skin, like a shadow that had learned to whisper. But something else began to take root too. Each morning, June would wake to find fresh fruit left by the door, a thermos of tea, once a note tucked under a napkin, written in Victor's steady hand. "You don't need to be anything other than exactly who you are, and that's more than enough." June read it 3 times before folding it gently and placing it inside her journal. She didn't write much anymore, not since Stella came. But lately, the words had started to return, mostly at night. She wrote in stolen moments, after Stella was fed, after the dishes were done, in the hush between one breath and the next. She didn't write stories. She wrote memories, fragments, truths she hadn't dared speak aloud. Sometimes they were about Tristan, sometimes about the girl she used to be. But more and more, they were about Victor, how he never asked for space, but gave it anyway. How his silence didn't pressure her, but held her. How he looked at Stella like she was already someone worth believing in. One evening, she left her journal open by mistake. When she returned from rocking Stella to sleep, Victor was standing at the table, reading. He looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." June held up a hand. "It's okay." He hesitated, then said softly, "You write beautifully. It's just thoughts," she said. "They don't always make sense. They do to me." She stepped closer, then paused. "Do you ever write?" Victor gave a small smile. "Used to. In college. Poetry. Believe it or not." June raised an eyebrow. "Victor Grant wrote poetry. Terrible poetry," he said with a grin. "But it helped me breathe when I didn't know how else to." She nodded slowly. "I get that." That night, they sat on the couch, a quiet lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. June curled one leg beneath her, a blanket draped across her lap. Victor sat across from her, a legal pad in hand, scribbling something she couldn't quite see. When he looked up, he said, "I think I forgot how good it feels to speak without talking." She met his gaze. "You're safe here. You know that." Right. He looked at her for a long moment. I do now. June glanced toward Stella's bassinet, then back at Victor. It's strange how someone can break you so completely, and yet life keeps going. It doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. It doesn't, he said, but sometimes it sends you someone who reminds you how to. They were quiet after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because some truths don't need to be spoken to be heard. One afternoon, June ventured into the main house. Mrs. Langford had invited her to look through a few old boxes of baby things she'd saved from Victor's niece, now a teenager. June carried Stella in a sling, her tiny head nestled beneath June's chin. As she wandered through the great hall, her footsteps soft on polished wood, she passed a gallery of framed photographs. One caught her eye. It was Victor, younger, laughing. Beside him stood a woman, elegant, blonde, and beaming, Isabella. June stared at the picture for a long time. She hadn't asked about her, not directly, but she knew the shape of that shadow well, the way it lingered around corners, soft but ever-present. Mrs. Langford approached quietly. That was 5 years ago, before things changed. June turned. She's beautiful. She was never meant for this place, Langford said gently. She loved the city, the spotlight. She left Victor long before she left the marriage. June lowered her eyes. Does she still come around? No. Langford replied, not since the separation. But she's not gone. Not really. Some people leave echoes that take years to fade. June nodded slowly. I understand that. As she walked back to the cottage later, her heart felt heavier. Not jealous, just unsure. There were rooms in Victor's life she hadn't entered yet, doors he'd left closed, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to knock or wait. That night, she asked him. They sat on the back steps, wrapped in the same old quilt, sipping tea from mismatched mugs. Do you still think about her? She asked, not accusing, just curious. Victor didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, sometimes? June looked down, but not the way you think. He continued, I don't miss her. I miss who I thought I was with her. She glanced up. I thought being with her made me whole. He said, but I was just hiding inside a version of myself that didn't ask too many questions. And now June asked. Victor's eyes met hers. Now I'm learning that wholeness doesn't come from being chosen by someone. It comes from choosing yourself. June smiled faintly. That sounds like something you'd write in a poem. Victor chuckled. Maybe I will. And with that, they sat together, the stars rising slowly above the trees, words slipping between them like threads connecting, binding, healing, not loudly, but enough. It began with a voicemail. Victor rarely left his phone on during his visits to the cottage, preferring the soft rhythm of conversation and baby laughter to the buzz of business. But one afternoon, as he was helping June fix a crooked cabinet door in the kitchen, his phone rang and buzzed 3 times in a row, then fell silent. He glanced at it, frowned, and excused himself. June wiped her hands on a towel, half watching from the window as Victor stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the garden path. His face shifted as he listened. He didn't speak much, just stood still for a long time. Then quietly ended the call, pocketed his phone, and returned inside with that composed expression she knew too well, too calm to be casual. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound breezy. Victor nodded, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Yeah, just a business thing." She wanted to ask more, but she didn't, not yet. That evening he stayed later than usual. They ate leftovers by the fire. Stella curled up in a blanket beside them. Victor told a story about his college roommate accidentally setting off the campus fire alarm with a microwave burrito. June laughed harder than she had in weeks, but even as they laughed, part of her wondered what had really been said on the phone. The next morning, Mrs. Langford came by early. "I just saw someone near the front gate," she said, lips tight. "A woman." She didn't speak, just asked if Victor was home, then left before I could say more. June blinked. What did she look like? Blonde, tall, dressed like a city magazine cover. June's stomach twisted. "Isabella." Mrs. Langford gave a subtle nod. "Could be." Victor didn't mention it when he came by later. June waited, gave him space, but as the afternoon passed, and he offered only gentle smiles and small stories, she couldn't hold it in. "Did you come by?" she asked suddenly. Victor paused, his hand resting on the back of Stella's chair. "Who is Isabella?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She left a voicemail yesterday. That's what the call was about. And she's heard rumors about me, about you." June's chest tightened. "Rumors?" Victor nodded. "Tristan's been talking. Apparently, Isabella didn't appreciate hearing about my new family from someone else." June stood slowly. "We're not a family." Victor met her eyes. "Aren't we?" She faltered. Victor stepped closer. "You're here. Stella's here. Every day I wake up, and this place feels more like home than my own house ever did." June looked away. "That doesn't mean it's real." "It's real to me." She bit her lip. "But what does Isabella want?" Victor hesitated. "She wants to talk. Said she's coming back into town next week. For closure." "Closure," June repeated flatly. "Does she know you're still married?" Victor blinked. "We've been separated for 2 years, but not divorced." A heavy silence settled between them. Victor took a step back. "It's complicated." "No," June said, shaking her head. "It's actually pretty simple. You're still tied to her, and I'm standing in the middle of it." Victor's voice was soft. "You're not a complication, June." "I feel like one." Stella stirred in the next room, her cry cutting through the tension like glass. June moved to pick her up, holding her close as if to protect her from something neither of them could name. Victor stood silently by the door, watching them. Then, quietly, he said, "I don't want to lose this." June's back was to him. "Then don't let your past decide our future." She didn't look up when he left. That night, June sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, Stella asleep in the crib beside her. The wind had picked up again, not violent, but restless. She stared at the trees, wondering how something so still during the day could tremble so easily in the dark. When Mrs. Langford came by with a thermos of tea, she didn't ask questions. She simply placed a hand on June's shoulder. "Sometimes," she said, "storms don't destroy things. They just show you where the roof needs patching." June managed a small smile. "It's a pretty big leak." Mrs. Langford squeezed her shoulder gently. "That man cares for you, more than he knows how to say. But he's never had to build something this fragile before. He's learning." June looked down at Stella. "I just don't want to be the lesson." "You're not," Langford said. "You're the reason he's learning at all." The knock came just after dusk. Victor had stayed away the past 2 days, giving June space. Or maybe giving himself time. She hadn't reached out. There were things she needed to sort through alone. But when the knock echoed through the small cottage, she didn't expect it to be her. Isabella Grant stood in the doorway like she'd never left, tall, poised, and immaculate, wrapped in a camel coat with silk gloves and a scarf knotted at her throat. She looked like a page from a fashion catalog. Her eyes scanned the interior with the cool precision of someone used to cataloging value. June blinked. "You must be lost." Isabella gave a polite smile. "I rarely get lost. May I come in?" June didn't move. "Victor's not here." "I know," Isabella said calmly. "But you are, and I think we should talk." After a long pause, June stepped back. 5 minutes. Isabella entered like she owned the air. She glanced at the rocking chair, at the faint scent of baby powder in the room. "So, this is where he's been hiding." June folded her arms. "He's not hiding. He's living." Isabella turned to her, expression unreadable. "I underestimated you. Most people do. You're not what I expected." Isabella continued. "You're not naive. You're not weak, which makes this more complicated." June narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" "I want to make sure you know what you're getting into." Isabella's voice remained cool, measured. "Victor and I were separated for a reason, but we're still legally tied, emotionally, financially, publicly." "I'm not after his money," June said flatly. Isabella nodded. "I believe you. That's not what I'm worried about." "Then what are you worried about?" Isabella stepped closer. "Victor is the kind of man who loves deeply when he allows himself to, but he also has a habit of turning guilt into responsibility. He once spent 2 years funding a charity just because he forgot someone's name at a dinner party." June gave a cold laugh. "And what's your point?" "My point," Isabella said, voice lowering, "is that you're not the first woman he's tried to rescue." June's jaw clenched. "And how did it end with them?" she asked. "Badly," Isabella replied. "Not because they weren't worthy, but because they thought being saved was the same as being loved." June stared at her for a long moment. "I didn't ask for saving." Isabella smiled faintly. "But you didn't say no, either." Silence thickened the air between them. Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a thin envelope. "This is a preliminary notice from my attorney. I'm filing for a formal review of Victor's estate and public assets, including any gifts that might be misconstrued as transfers of wealth. If things continue between you two, I suggest you be very clear about what's yours and what's his." June's face paled. "You're threatening me. I'm protecting what's mine," Isabella said smoothly, "or what's still legally mine, for now." She stepped toward the door, then turned back one last time. "You're stronger than I expected. June, I mean that, which is why this will be interesting." And then she was gone. Victor arrived less than an hour later. June didn't wait. She came here. She said the moment he stepped inside, he stopped cold. "Who, Isabella?" His expression shifted. "She said she might. She didn't visit. She came to warn me. Threatened me, actually." Victor exhaled, rubbing his temples. I didn't want this to touch you. She gave me legal paperwork. Victor, about your estate. About me. Like I'm some charity case with a price tag. I'll handle it, he said quickly. No, June replied, voice sharp. You should have handled it months ago. Victor looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. I didn't think it would matter. Well, it does. He stepped closer. June, is this who you are? She interrupted. A man who wants to do the right thing so badly he forgets to be honest. I was trying to protect you from what she asked, from knowing I'm standing on ground that could be ripped out from under me any second. Victor said nothing. June's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. I can't build a future on secrets, and I won't raise my daughter in the middle of a war between people who still think they own each other. Victor looked at her, quiet. She turned away. I need time. I'll give it to you. June nodded once. Please do. And as he left, the silence that followed wasn't soft like before. It was full of cracks, sharp and heavy, echoing the weight of everything left unsaid. Victor hadn't slept. His office in the main house was dimly lit, the fire reduced to flickers of orange in the hearth. Outside, snow had begun to fall soft, slow, like the world was trying to hush itself. The storm wasn't loud this time. It was the kind that crept in quietly and changed everything overnight. He sat at the desk, a single page in front of him, a pen beside it, the final draft of the divorce papers. He'd stared at them for hours. Isabella's threats weren't what forced his hand, at least not entirely. June's words had. The way her voice didn't crack when she told him she needed time, the way she didn't beg or accuse. She simply stood in her truth. And in doing so, she revealed his own cowardice. Victor closed his eyes. He'd spent years compartmentalizing. He'd made a career of control, of fixing things with logic and silence. But love didn't live in quiet corners. It demanded vulnerability, risk, sacrifice. He opened his eyes again, picked up the pen, signed his name. June didn't expect the knock. It was past 8 the next evening, Stella finally asleep, and the wind outside brushing gently at the windows. She opened the door slowly, not sure who she expected, but it wasn't Victor. He stood there, no coat, no umbrella, snow dusting the shoulders of his sweater. In his hands was a worn shoebox, tied with a ribbon. I know you said you needed time, he said, but I have something for you. June hesitated, then stepped aside. Victor placed the box on the table and removed the lid carefully. Inside were dozens of small envelopes, handwritten, sealed, some creased from years of keeping. What is this? She asked. My promises, he said. Everyone I've made to someone and failed to keep. June blinked. You saved them. I wrote them down every time I broke one. To remind myself, she opened one. The handwriting was his. I promise to be home by 7. I promise I'll remember her birthday. I promise not to forget who I was before the money. She looked up, eyes misted. I kept waiting for the pile to stop growing. He said softly, but it didn't. Until I met you. June swallowed hard. Victor. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. This one is different, he said. It's the only one I want to keep now. She unfolded it carefully. I promise not to rescue you. I promise to walk beside you, to hold your hand when the path is rough, and to never let your story feel small again. She pressed the note to her chest, breath shaking. "I've filed the divorce," Victor added. "It's final in 30 days. I should have done it a long time ago, but I wasn't ready to let go of the version of me I thought I had to be." And now she asked, barely above a whisper. "Now," he said, "I just want to be the man you see when you look at me." June stood silent for a long moment. Then she walked to the shelf and retrieved her journal. She opened to the back and slipped his note inside. "Then let's start keeping promises together," she said. Victor stepped closer, cupping her face. "Marry me," he said. June laughed, half joy, half disbelief. "Are you serious?" "As serious as I've ever been. Not because I want to rescue you, but because I want to build something with you." She looked at him, truly looked, and in his eyes she didn't see a savior. She saw a man who had unlearned the silence. She nodded slowly. "Yes." And for the first time in both their lives, the future didn't feel like a storm to brace for. It felt like a vow they would choose again and again with open hearts. The courthouse was colder than June expected, not in temperature, though the air did bite, but in tone. The walls were stark, the benches rigid, the people detached. Even the judge, an older woman with sharp eyes behind delicate frames, seemed carved from marble. June sat beside Victor at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from them, Isabella looked pristine in her designer coat and practiced poise. Her attorney, a man with a reputation for ruthless litigation, flipped through folders with the confidence of someone who never entered a courtroom to lose. Victor leaned closer. "No matter what they say, remember what we've built?" June nodded, though the knot in her chest remained. The case wasn't a criminal one. It was a challenge to Victor's estate and financial decisions. Isabella alleged that June was a manipulator, that Victor was transferring assets out of emotional guilt, and that their relationship was a fabrication designed to obscure improper intent. She is, by all legal standards, Isabella's lawyer stated, a destabilizing presence in Mr. Grant's life. June tried not to flinch. Ms. Holloway moved onto the property without a lease, received financial gifts exceeding $200,000 in kind, including security systems, living quarters, and child care, and now seeks to become his spouse while he is still, on paper, legally married. Victor's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the opening remarks to continue. They met. The attorney continued. When she gave birth in his car, a remarkable coincidence, one might even say. Convenient. Victor's hand closed around June's, tight, grounding. When it was their turn to speak, Victor stood without a single note in his hand. "I have made many mistakes," he said. Most of them involve staying silent for too long. But this relationship, this life we're building, is not one of them. He looked directly at Isabella. "I loved you once, and maybe a part of me always will. But that love ended a long time ago. You walked away, not because of who I was, but because of who I refused to become." He turned to the judge. "June Holloway did not ask me for anything, not $1, not one favor. She never played the victim. She never manipulated me. She gave birth in the back of my car, trusted me with her child, and allowed me to witness the kind of strength that can't be bought or faked." The judge studied him, unreadable. Victor sat down. June's turn came. She stood slowly, heart thundering. "I didn't ask for this life. she said. "I didn't grow up dreaming of courtrooms or men with estates. I was raised by a single mother who taught me how to survive. And when I got pregnant, I thought that's all I'd do, survive." She looked at Isabella, then the judge. "But Victor taught me how to live, not by giving me things, but by believing I was worth showing up for." She paused. "I'm not here for his money. I'm here because of what we're building together, because I want my daughter to grow up in a home where love is louder than fear." The courtroom fell still. Even Isabella's expression faltered, just slightly. The judge called for a short recess, outside, in the garden behind the courthouse. Victor found June pacing by a frozen fountain. "You were brilliant," he said softly. June turned, eyes bright with emotion. "I was terrified." He pulled her close. "I was, too." She leaned against him, and for a long moment they simply breathed, no audience, no arguments, just the rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in unison again. When they returned inside, the judge issued her ruling. "This court finds no evidence of financial misconduct. Ms. Holloway's presence on the property and in Mr. Grant's life is neither unlawful nor inappropriate. The estate remains under his full discretion." The final sentence was firm. Love, when real, is not a liability. Case dismissed. Isabella didn't speak as she gathered her things. Her attorney whispered something, but she waved him off. June watched her go, not with triumph, but with a quiet ache for all the stories that end without healing. Victor turned to June, ready to go home. She nodded. Yes, home. The snow had melted by the time spring found them. Not all at once, but gradually, in the way healing often arrives. The trees outside the cottage began to bud with timid green, and birds returned to the branches with a confidence June hadn't realized she'd missed. Inside, everything had changed, and nothing had. The bassinet was still tucked in the corner of the cottage's small living room, now slightly too snug for Stella's growing limbs. Her giggles had replaced the hush of newborn cries, and her eyes followed June with an awareness that felt like wonder. Victor had moved in, not all at once, but with intention. A single suitcase at first, then his books, then a drawer, then his presence, like sunlight through windows that had always known how to hold it. They didn't rush the wedding. They didn't need to. Instead, they chose mornings, slow breakfasts, walks through the orchard, Tuesday evenings spent reading side by side while Stella slept curled between them. One Saturday in April, June found a note on the windowsill. No envelope, just a single line in Victor's familiar handwriting. "Will you marry me under the birch tree where it all began?" She didn't write back. She simply walked outside and stood beneath the tree, arms open, and waited until he stepped through the garden and into her arms. The wedding was small. Mrs. Langford cried the most, though she claimed it was just allergies. Victor wore his father's watch. June wore no veil, only a simple white dress, and Stella in her arms. They said their vows under that birch tree, the same one June had stumbled past on the night her water broke, too afraid to hope for kindness. Now it stood like a witness to grace. Victor's voice didn't shake when he spoke. "I vow not to be your rescue, but your rest, your home, not your shelter, your partner, not your fixer." June smiled through her tears. "And I vow," she whispered, to never let the past decide our joy. Stella clapped once, perfectly timed, and everyone laughed. Later that evening, as the guests trickled out and the light faded into soft lavender, June and Victor stood alone in the garden, barefoot in the grass, the silence full of warmth. "Do you ever think about that night?" June asked. Victor nodded. "Every day. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your window?" He turned to her, voice steady. "Then the best part of my life would have never begun." She leaned into him. They stayed there a long time. Months passed. They bought a small cabin by the lake for weekend retreats. Stella took her first steps on the dock, arms outstretched, like she already knew how to chase freedom. Victor published a memoir between silence and shelter. It wasn't about wealth or business. It was about the spaces we fill with courage when everything familiar disappears. June went back to nursing part-time at a local clinic. She kept her journal, though now the pages held not pain, but poetry. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, they returned to the birch tree, not to relive, but to remember, not the chaos, but the choosing of love, of hope, of home. Because sometimes the stranger who helps you bring life into the world is the one who teaches you how to live it. Sometimes the most unexpected turns in life lead us to the places we were always meant to be. This story reminds us that healing rarely arrives in grand gestures. It often comes in the quiet moments, a shared silence, a steady hand, a baby's breath in the middle of the night. June and Victor didn't fall into love. They chose it day by day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. For those of us who have weathered storms of loss, of loneliness, of letting go, it's comforting to know that new beginnings aren't reserved for the young. They belong to anyone brave enough to believe again. We are never too old to be surprised by grace, never too far gone to build something gentle and lasting from the ashes of what once was. And maybe, just maybe, it's not about being rescued at all. It's about finding someone who chooses to stay, even when leaving would be easier. So if you're holding on to pain, to regret, to memories that feel heavier with time, let this be your quiet reminder the story isn't over yet. Sometimes home finds you when you stop trying to be strong and just allow yourself to be seen. Thank you so much for being here. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to help it reach someone else who might need it too. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue telling stories that heal, connect, and inspire. Until next time, take care of your heart.